Hi, this is Mike Morris. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Amherst, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We've got a nice crowd of about 140 people online. I think some others will probably join as we go. But I really want to thank you for coming to this elementary town hall today. We know this is an incredibly difficult time in all sorts of ways, and today I'm here with the chairs and vice chairs of 3 school committees that employ me, and so I'll introduce them in a second, as well as Jill Consolino, who's our nurse leader here in all 3 districts. And we feel like that's critical to have Jill on because we know that there will be some health and safety questions that she's best able to answer. The goal today is that the school committee will present a draft priorities document that they talked about in a school committee meeting on Tuesday of this week, 2 days ago. And the goal is to gather feedback. One of the ways to gather feedback is certainly to email the school committee at schoolcommittee.arps.org or me at morrism@arps.org. For today's purposes, there is a chat feature on YouTube. You see on the right. You can type in comments, questions. We'll be able to display some of them on the screen. We'll try to do our best to see how many we can get through before 1 o'clock. But the comments we can see and the questions, again, we'll post to the relevant person. But it is intended to be an interactive town hall. I think by 12:15 or so, we should be done talking and presenting. That's our goal. So we have 45 minutes to hear from the community and answer questions. I think, we'll just ask that while you use the chat feature, the same kind of respectful dialogue that we would have, at school committees or in conversations, we would encourage you to use. We know this is a strong and emotional topic for many people, and that's fine. We would just ask steering away from things that identify individuals in your commentary. I think with that, I just want to thank school members and Jill for being on this call. I want to remind folks that there's a similar call at the secondary level that's scheduled tonight or this afternoon for 5 o'clock. This one's going to focus much more on the elementary pre-K to 6 level. And I think I'll turn it over to Chairs McDonald and Hall.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. This is posted as an open meeting. So at this point, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Amherst-Berlin Regional School Committee. And I'll call to order the meeting of the Amherst School Committee.
And I'll call to order the meeting of the Pelham School Committee.
Ms. McDonald and Ms. Hall, would you like me to bring up the priorities document at this point? Okay.
Yes, please.
Sure. Let's see. I had it, and then now I want to make sure I have the right one. I apologize. There we go. There we go. And so I'm going to actually make it larger so that it's more visible, so people won't be able to see us for a little bit. But I think for people's viewing, the benefit of their viewing, I'm going to make that larger. So Ms. McDonald, Ms. Hall, or any other school committee members can talk through that. But I just wanted to increase the size so people could see it a bit better.
Great, thank you. Hopefully it's clear, but so I'll talk through this document. I won't read everything, but this is available on our website, and if it's not there already, it will be very soon. So we'll talk through some of the high points. And for those that watched our school committee meeting on Tuesday evening, where we did talk about this document as our 3 committees. You're familiar with some of the framing of this. We pulled this together and offer this document. We will be continuing to talk about it on Tuesday of next week as guidance to help Dr. Morris and the district in pulling together the plans and models for how we're going to go back to school in the fall. In this document, it assumes a best case scenario in terms of our local health situation. As many of those who are keeping track at home, there are multiple phases, both within the CDC guidance or steps and stages, and this assumes that we're at least at that step 2, and then also there are phases and steps and requirements from DESE in terms of having 3 plans. So this is assuming that best case scenario, and clearly things, as you'll see when we go through this document, things can and will change. And this document is not intended to be carved in stone, but to outline sort of how we will adjust and where we're going to be looking for guidance as we adjust throughout the year. So first and foremost are our overall goals, and we have three. Number one, to protect staff and student safety. Number two, to maximize in-person learning time while maintaining 6 feet of physical distance. And number three, invest in and deliver the highest quality distance learning experience possible. And we had lots of discussion about this with the school committee on Tuesday. So this is, as noted, a draft document, and what part of what we want to hear from the community today is sort of reactions to some of these principles. So within staff and student safety, what we're looking at here is prioritizing public health guidance. And we list a few of those here, namely the Centers of Disease Control, American Academy of Pediatrics, the state, and our local public health officials as sort of informing our decision-making process and approaches for back to school. We're going to be informed by the guidance from DESE, part of which requires us to submit 3 separate plans for opening school. Our reopening plan is designed as much as possible to maintain that 6 feet of physical distance as much as possible between individuals, that all staff and students will wear facial coverings as much as possible for grades 2 to 12 and where possible for K through 1st grade, and that staff and students will engage in frequent hand washing and hand sanitizing. And sort of predicated on that is also providing the equipment and the tools to be able to do that. And we want to provide accommodations for students and staff with underlying medical conditions. With in-person learning, one of the things that we as a school committee were discussing was how we wanted to talk about these first 2 bullet points. The first one being that we want to prioritize getting elementary students, including the Caminantes program in Amherst, for in-person learning as much as possible, whether that's 4 to 5 days per week or 80 to 100% of school in-school learning time. That definition is that detail is to be discussed, but really prioritizing getting elementary students back to in-person learning. And the middle school and high school students provided in-person learning at least 2 days per week or at least 40% of school days. Maximizing the time for special ed education and English language learners or ELL students provided as much in-person learning time as possible, providing outdoor learning space and opportunities when feasible, and preparing distance learning plans as backup for both the in-person and hybrid learning approaches, knowing that conditions will change or can change and closures or other disruptions to in-person learning may arise. And key in in-person learning is providing support for staff and teachers, both in time as well as training, to adapt to the requirements of this in-person physically distanced learning environment. With regard to distance learning, and this would apply both for full-time in distance learning. So again, if a school closure is warranted, or for those hybrid learning approaches, that the distance learning will be greatly improved from what we had in the spring, which was emergency remote learning that we implemented in the spring. So here we outlined that we want to ensure consistency across instructional processes within schools, employ instructional models that are well suited for a distance learning environment, offer appropriate levels of challenge for every student, and incorporate both synchronous and asynchronous approaches. We want to ensure that distance learning models are developed for all grades, again, to prepare for potential disruptions to in-person learning. Plans will be created to support and train staff, students, and families with the instructional tools and technologies. Districts will ensure that students have devices and access to internet to support their engagement with distance learning. And teachers and staff will be provided the support in both time and professional development to adapt to distance learning instructional models. So I apologize, I did tend to read more of everything here. I think, and I'll ask my fellow committee members on the call if I left any important details out that we were discussing on Tuesday evening that you would like to add. I'm not hearing any.
Okay, so why don't I? Okay, there we are. Thank you. So I think at this point, if there's anything any of the other committee members want to say in general, then please, you can jump in. Otherwise, ahead of schedule, Ms. McDonald, so well done. We can open it up for comments. We have a couple, there were more just reminders that this is focused on the elementary school level at 5 o'clock. There'll be a similar session about the secondary level. There was a question about the document that was just went over by Ms. McDonald, and the link was posted of where that is. It was in the packet on Tuesday night. It'll also be on our fall 2020 planning site by the end of the day. But I think at this point, we just want to open it up to see if there are questions, comments that anyone who's on this stream would have for the committee, for myself, for Ms. Consolino about thinking about fall planning. So we'll give it a second for people to weigh in. I saw one has come in about busing and transportation. I think I'll start with that one. We did an analysis that was presented. Here we go. We did analysis based on kind of 3 scenarios that was presented on Tuesday night for the elementary schools. One was our current practice is to transport every student. The second is actually our school committee policy, which we exceed right now. I was going to say don't follow, but that sounds worse. So I think we exceed the school committee policy, which is that transportation is provided for elementary students who live greater than 1.5 miles. The bus stop would be 1.5 miles or greater from school. And that would reduce the number of students who would take the bus. And the last scenario would be the legal limit, which is 2 miles from the school. We also did survey families early this year. About 30 some odd % of elementary families who responded said they would transport their children, and another 20 some odd % said they would likely transport their children. I was just on a conference call today with the state. We still don't have guidance from the state on exactly how many students can participate or would be able to ride a bus from their guidance. So transportation is a variable that is a little undetermined right now, but we are doing our legwork to know what the variables are as we receive that information. I don't know if there's anything that the committees would want to share in addition. Okay. And
Mike?
Yep.
I would just say to people that they can see the information about busing if they go and look at the minutes from, or the agenda from the Tuesday night school committee meeting.
I guess I would also add that we are still awaiting guidance from the state on transportation. Hopefully that will be this month. And so that may affect what we're able to offer as well. But we're proceeding ahead with the timeline that we feel we have to go on now before we get that state guidance.
Great. Thank you. We have a number of questions that have come in. So next one is, how will consistency of expectations across classrooms, grades, and schools be ensured? I'm a little unsure if this is referring to if we're in a distance learning model or an in-class person model, but I'll answer both. So certainly, one place I would recommend people going, and maybe Sasha can get the link up, is our fall 2020 planning site, because one of the things that we did this spring is we had teams of staff work on guiding principles. And I think on Tuesday night, we presented also some feedback about distance learning. And I think the general agreement of all parties, we also surveyed middle school and high school students. We have a whole lot of data. And one of the things that it fully aligns on is that we need to be much more clear if we're in a distance learning environment about the expectations and to work much more as grade levels and not necessarily even just as schools, but across cross schools and almost grade level bands to make sure that there's a consistency of expectations. I think there was full acknowledgement that what happened in the spring in terms of distance learning would not be repeated if we are in a distance learning environment, or if students or families choose to be in a distance learning environment this fall. And so we are developing plans, but the guiding principles, I think, do more justice than my words could at the moment about how that might be approached. As we have a number of comments, I'm going to keep just going in order, I think, as I see them. So are there any upgrades? And I'm just reading these just for access points. I know we're displaying them as well. Are there any upgrades being made to the physical spaces? HVAC and air filtration is something I'm specifically concerned about. The answer is yes. So at Wildwood and Fort River in particular, I'll speak to those two, and then I'll speak to all 4 of our elementary schools across the 2 districts. So at those schools, the quads are turning into halvesies or something. We'll have a better name for them at some point, which I don't have the visual up and ready, but if you think of the quads as being one large space subdivided into 4s, essentially this sets up that big space subdivided into 2s with much more solid walls going between those 2 spaces. So it doesn't share air circulation and flow that way. Each of those halvesies would have 2 unit vents, windows on both sides for cross ventilation. And the big difference from ventilation point of view is currently there is 1 vent out from all the quads. It all goes, if you've been in Fort River Wildwood, if you think of the bathrooms in the back of the quad area, there's 1 venting out for all those, and this is splitting it. So there's a vent for each room, so it's not mixing air. At all of the schools will exceed or meet ASHRAE standards, which is the kind of governing body of that, by essentially running the air at higher velocity and for more hours each day. So ASHRAE typically recommends a more balanced approach in terms of how you're doing that as compared to energy efficiency, and this is not a typical time. And so we know that we'll have increased costs for doing that, and it's what's being recommended is what we'll do. Additionally, at the elementary level, the principals are working on schedules very much following a model from Finland where there might be 45 minutes or so of academic time and then 10 minutes of outside time. So every hour on the 85% of days there's not, or 90% of days there's not torrential rain, that students would be getting outside routinely. Additionally, we're not using any classrooms for students that don't have windows for additional ventilation capacity. Finally, for all of our schools, right, the thing I mentioned about running univents and ventilators more often and all those, that includes for Crocker Farm as well as for Pelham as well. And then the last thing, sorry, I keep on saying last thing, there's also going to be fewer bodies and spaces, right? So if you think of the typical quad, at any given time, there might be 70, 80 students. If there's 4, if they're all filled with classrooms, that's a lot of bodies breathing air and all going to 1 vent. And that also has an influence on ventilation and air filtration as well. So Jill, I don't know if I missed anything that you wanted to share or if I hit the points, perhaps not as well stated as you would. If I realized I should have turned to you, but I realized it too late.
No, that's okay. No, you hit the points pretty good. I'm not an HVAC technician or specialist by any means. And Rupert Roy Clark, who is our facilities director, he's done an excellent job on getting all those upgrades in place. And we are taking the measures that we're supposed to get the physical spaces ready and utilizing spaces that have windows so we can have fresh air flowing in and out of those classrooms. And we're looking at not using any of the classrooms that don't have windows to avoid those those situations. But yeah, there's been a lot of changes done to some of the elementary buildings that only enhances the physical spaces that the kids will be in the fall.
Great. So we have a number of comments, so I'm just going to keep on rolling with them, and anyone can jump in. What is happening with the Comandantes program? Will there be a lottery soon? Yeah, there's going to be communication. Might have happened last night, actually. If not, it's happening today from Ms. Richardson. We spoke yesterday afternoon. We are planning on having a lottery. I think at this point, with the uncertainty of what school looks like, I think we are being cautious that we're doing a lottery because families, need to have that information. Our transportation department needs to have that information. I think if we were, for instance, in a more virtual environment, it's hard to imagine that being successful for incoming kindergartners. The nature of that program is the reliance on oral communication, and that's more challenging to pull off with 5-year-olds in a virtual environment. So we are moving forward with the lottery once our model is settled on, which we hope happens this month, I'll say, early August. Then we'll be able to confirm that. But we want to go forward with the lotteries because we know families want to know that information. And I think I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to jump in on that, or I'm seeing shaking heads. Do you have a plan for students who live with people who are high risk for the more severe forms of COVID-19? Will they be able to opt into entirely remote learning? The quick answer is yes. As we develop our models, we will be planning for that. And we got clarity on that actually just in the last hour from a DESE conference call I was in, that families will have the option, and certainly they can homeschool or receive virtual education. And what that virtual education is, the state is working with local districts, potentially on some platforms that might be helpful. Some districts may choose to use their own staff, and so we will be working on that as we go. And looking at the map of classroom layout, they have second graders have 3 classrooms and kindergartens have 2. This is typical. How does this allow for increased space between students? So what you'd see in terms of the layout, and there was last night, it was right before the map started, or Tuesday night, I should say, there was a map of what classrooms would look like. And typically our classrooms for young students use tables, and students are very close to one another. In the models and layouts for any of our schools, the desks would be laid out 6 feet apart. And so that would be the increased space between students, is really spacing students out. It's removing most objects in the room that are not desk students, teachers, and teacher desks, as well as student materials. So that's a good visual. If I wasn't running through these questions, might be able to pull it up, but it's on our website. It's on the fall 2020 website. I encourage people to look there at that. Yep. So that's exactly it, Alexandra. So if we had 16 students, first of all, most of the time our elementary schools, I think Pelham has 1 classroom that we're actually not planning to use that's that small, 750 feet. All of the other classrooms at elementary school are well over 800 feet. And so the maximum is 16 students. You know, at Crocker Farm, we're really looking at 15 because of some of the built-ins. Even though the classrooms are over 900 square feet, the built-in cabinetry makes it not fit. So that's why we looked at each different room individually, not as just a square footage. But it's really that we wouldn't spread students out in a typical classroom environment using the whole space, and in this environment we would. How would this impact van service for students who are required? Again, we're still waiting for DESE information on transportation, so I don't have good clarity specifically on that one yet. And they're meeting with doctors like at MGH and trying to figure out what's the best approach as it relates to transportation. But we aren't just thinking of buses. I think that's a good point. I should continue to say buses or vans for transportation. Thank you for that. So the state guidance is, and in this document, was kids are required to wear masks as possible as starting in grade 2. What are expectations for the younger grades? I can start on that, but Jill, maybe give me a break for a talking break. Do you want to answer that one instead of me?
Sure. So right now the recommendation from DPH and Department of Education is that students in grades 2 and older will be required to wear masks or facial coverings if they're able to in school, and the kids in the younger grades, it's recommended. So we're going to be encouraging students in those younger grades, if it's possible for them to wear a facial covering or a mask in school when they're not able to maintain the 6-foot physical distance between classmates and staff. And it'll be, to the best of our ability and teachers' abilities. We will know that there will be students that fit under the criteria of the, not being able to wear a mask, if they have a medical condition that they don't tolerate it, or, another condition where they're not able to, they fit into a criteria where they're not able to physically put on or take off a mask, they would not be required to wear one in school. So we have a boatload of PPE already on site, and we will have some backups. We will be asking families to provide masks or facial coverings for their students, but we will have backups if one is forgotten or we need to replace one during the school day.
And I want to say, that is a conversation the school committee has had. So what Ms. Consolino said is accurate, and I know there were some committee members who wanted to come back to the conversation about kindergartners, first graders, and the state language is strongly encouraged. And so I think the more feedback that people have, and I know there's some feedback on that in the comments that I see, that's really helpful for the committee and myself to see. And it's helpful today. And also just to remind folks about schoolcommittee@arps.org and morrism@arps.org. And that's something that I know is, or I believe is something the committee will want to return to, particularly because I've heard a lot about the kindergarten first grade question and face coverings. I'm going to use face coverings instead of masks because I think there's some thinking about different face coverings for K and 1 that may be more tolerable for young students. Thank you for the kind comment, Haley. And for Crocker Farm, and this is true in Pelham as well, we built our models on 100% of students returning. I see there's a question later on, will we resurvey parents about students returning? And the question, that's absolutely. We wanted to get a baseline. So I think what's likely to happen is less than 100% of students will return. I think that's highly likely. And so we will have to redo the space pieces. And so we put the grade 5-6 combo, and there's also a 1-2 combo both at Crocker and at Pelham, I believe, up. That's assuming 100% of students return. We have to do that because until a student says, I'm not returning, I want all virtual, we have to account for those students being in the school setting. The reality, I think, will look different on the ground. Even our survey indicated in terms of definitely unlikely, I guess it was 86 or 87% returning. So we may not have to do the combined classrooms, but we wanted to give the school committee and the community an honest read of if all students returned, these are the choices that we'd have to make because of space and staffing. I think it's highly likely that, again, that number will drop and we may not have to do that. Getting to the specifics of the question is we've had a long history in the district, not as much in recent years, of having combined classes. Marks Meadow had, for instance, which is an elementary school that no longer is open on the UMass campus, had combined classes very frequently. Crocker Farm has had combined classes, and when I was there, we had one. The interesting thing right now is, grade level curriculum standards feel a little awkward because we know they don't really make as much sense as they did in a typical environment. So it is trying to think about that. If we did go forward, we'd be asking families at first if they were interested in being both 5th and 6th grade families. I've heard from a number of families who either feel like maybe another year, a little softer landing spot would be better because this spring has been very difficult for a whole host of reasons. Other students felt like they got ahead and they're really willing to push forward and can handle a higher level. So we would be engaging families and staff about what that model specifically looked like. And what we presented on Tuesday night was simply if all students returned, what would it look like from a space perspective? And that's where we are. Will kindergartners be required to walk? So no, we would provide transportation for K-6 students. We wouldn't differentiate between them. And I think in terms of other districts, like, across the river in Northampton, they've already voted a transportation policy. I think the expectation is that families would support their children, or communities would support their children through carpooling to getting to school. I will follow up more with Northampton and the thinking on that, but we're a little unique in terms of a district that provides transportation for all of its students. That's the outlier. It's not the norm as it is. So we could talk to other districts that have long-standing policies that reduce the number of buses or students on buses, and we can find out more. We tend to have a pretty expensive transportation model because we do provide that service for every single student who wants it. And we'd have to weigh, in my opinion, I won't speak for the committee, we'd have to weigh, can we reduce it less than 1.5 miles? So for closer, if families are willing to drive their students and hit the right spot on those. I think we won't have to, I don't think we'd have to go to 2 miles from our analysis because we know many families will drive their students to school under their own choice. The innovative opportunities to maintain in-person building instruction that we have not yet explored. Other buildings besides schools. Distance learning is devastating to working families. We have. The challenge is any building we open that's not a school would have to have an administrator and a school nurse. So anytime we expand our number of buildings, we're talking about a significant expense, unbudgeted expense in a year that we have a lot of them. And our financial picture got worse this year, not better. We cut over $1 million from between Amherst and Region. All three budgets pretty much had a 0% increase. So that's our challenge. We did explore it. One of the challenges in the community is there's a lot of buildings that maybe you can get 3 or 4 classrooms in, but from an economy of scale perspective, they don't really shift the larger dynamic. And to open 3 or 4 classrooms, hire another nurse and hire another administrator leads to some real challenges for us. So if people have ideas, morrism@arps.org, please email me. Email the school committee. We have explored town-owned buildings and some other buildings, but we found it challenging to have an accessible building for staff and students that would have enough classroom spaces that it would make a larger difference. And really, I guess the quicker way to answer it is, we're not really seeing at the elementary level, with the exception of Crocker Farm, perhaps. Space is not the barrier for us. All students at Pelham, all students at Fort River, all students at Wildwood could fit if we can staff those buildings. And Crocker Farm, at the school committee member on Tuesday night brought up, mobile space, mobile classrooms or different things that we can explore. But space is not the barrier for us at the elementary level. I'm sorry, I hope I'm leaving space for school committee members who want to jump in to be able to jump in. I feel like I'm doing more talking than so I think this one was answered, but absolutely there'll be an option for families who don't want to send their children to school at all. We're developing what that'll look like, but that's absolutely true. And for those students who have English language learner needs or special needs, those needs will be need to be attended to just as if they were in school as well. This is a good one for Ms. Consolino. How will you keep masks on younger children in K-2?
That's a good question, and I don't have the miracle answer to that. It's the guidance we have right now is that it'll be recommended for those kids to wear a facial covering in school, and we will have to wait and see on how the kids tolerate them. We're going to do our best to keep the kids 6 feet distanced apart. And what studies have shown is that if you can maintain a physical distance of 6 feet apart from somebody, then a facial covering is technically not required for quote unquote protection. So we're gonna try to encourage it as much as possible for these younger kids, but it's one of those things we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, and I think so. I was in touch with some public health folks outside the district, as well as some local physicians who offered to help with that and provide videos. I think an important point also is that in the guidance we received, it talks about mask breaks, that we don't expect students to keep, especially our youngest students, but all students and staff to keep masks on 100% of the day. And some of those might happen when their students are in outside spaces and distancing is a little easier for that matter. But I want to be realistic. If we set unrealistic expectations, we're doomed to be disappointed in that. That we want students to be wearing masks, all students, all staff, and that all the public health experts say people do need mask breaks from time to time, and working on how to schedule them. We do have some folks, both volunteers from our community who are involved in public health or our physicians who have offered to help us with what that looks like. I think I've answered some of the ones I'm going to skip because they're.
Dr. Moore,
sorry, please.
I think it's because people may not have heard, people coming in late now may not have heard sort of your response to a question earlier in the broadcast about the outside breaks that are being regularly scheduled, because I think that also gets at the question about how do you help children hold up, keep masks on for a great period, and sort of ties into mask breaks as well. Yeah,
so the model we're looking at, the elementary model, is something that Finland does on a regular basis. They did it pre-pandemic, not during pandemic times, which is that students get outside every hour, that there might be 45 minutes, 50 minutes of instruction, and then students go outside regularly for 10 or 15-minute breaks. And so that also might be the time where logically students get mask breaks, and it's much, much easier to sort of think of how that would work outside. I just having been to playgrounds with my own kids recently, you kind of get a flow of how that works and seeing other students. Props to the town of Amherst for Groff Park. It's really neat. Encourage everyone with young kids, because people on this call probably have young kids, to go there, and it's busy. So, for me personally, I did want my, to wear a mask and have children. And you recognize when you're at a playground, there are logical ways that people can have breaks. And even in terms of the guidance we've received from the Department of Public Health that Jill could talk about, I think I'll probably go down to more questions, unless this pops up again, is just really it's about distance and duration. That you want to think about 6 feet, but you get to higher risk the longer the duration. So thinking of kind of more routine mask breaks even inside that are shorter in duration seem consistent with the public health guidance we're receiving. But Joe, I mean, if there's more questions, we can go, but there's other questions on different topics. So, we have been in touch with UMass. I was in touch with them as recently as yesterday. I'll just say it's complicated, right? There's a lot of the colleges and universities, and I'm not going to speak to UMass in general, are teaching remotely or mostly remotely. Some of them are making their classroom spaces, their office available for faculty to use for some of that remote lecture. Also, some of the thinking is if they're trying to cordon off their campuses to the outside world, we are the outside world. And so that also creates some dilemmas for colleges and universities about if they don't want to open their space, what does that mean? So we are in touch with UMass regularly, and we will continue to explore that. But again, at the elementary level, space is not our concern. Again, Crocker Farm a little bit, but primarily space is not our concern. And at Crocker Farm, if the numbers go down from full attendance to which is what we had to present to less than full attendance, we may be able to get all students at Crocker Farm if we can figure out the staffing as well. Since this is going to work based on rotating kids, will remote learning teaching be a part of the schedule for the rest of the week? I think right now it's an open question. I'm not going to speak for the school committee, but they presented trying to get elementary students in as often as possible and regularly. I think the secondary level, there was a larger focus on a rotation in terms of the school committee document. I mean, Allison or anyone on any of the elementary school committees can jump in on that. Peter?
Yeah, I would just say that the document is currently drafted, asks for a goal of 80 to 100% time on site for K-6. That being said, we haven't looked at, or we haven't discussed at the school committee level yet what the exact start and end time of the day would be. And then if that doesn't cover the full start and end time that we're typically used to, would we then need to supplement with some remote learning? Dr. Morse, I don't know if you could speak to that, what initial thoughts are or planning is in terms of start and end time for K-6.
Yeah, so we are looking about shifting the start time back, perhaps not the end time. But I think one of the things that we realize is that, and the guidance we've received, this relates to a number of the other comments. Sorry, I was scrolling down, so I was listening mostly, but I was also scrolling, and the length of comments is large. Which is good. That's what we wanted. So, we are thinking of starting school later in the morning to give teachers more time for training. We're also thinking that first week in school in particular of having shorter days for students so that both students and staff can get acclimated under a new environment, build up tolerance for mask wearing, and also perhaps have some virtual education in the morning. There are some things that are really hard to imagine happening in school next year, and we expect guidance from the state on this, but some of the instrumental music, for instance, will be really hard to do based on the guidance we've received, especially certain instruments. So we are looking at, how can we make some hybrid approaches, even if students are in for quote unquote a full week, because we don't imagine a full week being the typical length day, 5 days a week, even in the best of COVID circumstances. Did that capture, Peter, where you were headed, I hope?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. So the comment mentions 2 days on, 2 days off. That's not a schedule that we've talked about at K-6. The goal, at least in the draft document so far, was 80 to 100% on site as much as possible, and that the implementation details of what those start and end times are still in process.
Yep. So another question: how are the blowers heating air circulation work in each building? So I spoke about that a little bit earlier, but the short story, and I'm not an HVAC specialist. Rupert spoke about this a couple of school committee meetings ago, and maybe we can get that link up to anyone who's curious. But essentially is that typically what's recommended is we balance ventilation in terms of heating, blowers, air circulation to balance how often the room turns over all of its air with energy efficiency, and that's what's recommended to us. And what plan would be for next year is to shift that balance to less on the energy efficiency side, to increase the number of times a day the full air circulates and turns over. Additionally, we're going to encourage, depending on the weather and the right moments, for windows to be open in buildings, and those are the two strategies in terms of increasing the velocity of the air coming out, which turns it over more often, and starting it longer before the school day and running it after the school day will be it. I think also getting to Mr. Demling, something he prompted in me, having a shorter school day while school's in session allows for much more disinfecting in the afternoon and in the mornings to be able to do cleaning. You know, we have a zero sum of custodians, right? We have the same custodians we have. So if we give them more time to clean, that actually helps with that. And actually, one of the biggest things, and this is kind of, it sounds surprising, but I've been told this by many people, including public health folks, is by reducing the quantity of stuff in rooms, it actually has a huge positive impact on air circulation, blowers, and heating. So when you look at barren classrooms, not only are they easier to clean, they actually greatly improve air circulation and airflow. And so I want to thank the teachers publicly. We asked people to de-densify their classrooms this spring, and people did a fantastic job of doing that, and continuing to do that. It's going to be in everyone's health, best interest of everyone's health. Another question about substitute situation. Actually, most of our subs, respectfully, Kate, our average age is lower of our subs than of our day in, day off staff. And so we are working on what the substitute situation looks like, and we have to staff for that. Some of our schools have permanent subs, and that's a really effective strategy around that. So it is something we're still working and looking for state guidance on. Same way with, I've gotten a lot of questions about student teachers. Are we taking student teachers? Might they be good subs because they will have all the protocols down, and we're still considering whether that's a good idea, a bad idea. We've been in touch with the public health folks on that topic as well, and we'll keep on working at it. Yeah, so I mean, the short answer to the question, I'm sorry, I didn't read it. Have you determined the relative amount of online learning that will occur in the synchronous methods you described? What I'd say is that the conference call I got on, we're going to be on pretty much the same hourly requirements that we're always on next year of 900 hours at the elementary level. So the synchronous learning is going to have to mirror what would happen if students were in school, where there's whatever it works out to, 5.5 hours of daily instruction. Some of that may be some asynchronous, but the majority would have to be synchronous. So I think for people who are making a decision about that are concerned that there may be health implications for their family, we have to cover all the standards, and our time on learning will be the same in school or out of school for next year. Yes, I mean, I'm just trying to skip around for different ones. Here's one I don't have an answer to, but I think when I got on this chat, the special ed guidance came out from DESE. So I've been hanging out with this chat and not on that document. So I don't have an answer to this one, but I know that Dr. Brady, our student service director, is anxiously reading that document right now, trying to figure out exactly what that works, how that'll work. Home-based care is a little complicated for us for a whole host of reasons. So this is a different environment. So I wanted to highlight the question as being a good one. Unfortunately, I don't have a clear answer. What I would say is if there's one-on-one in the child's IEP, we would have to cover that, if not in the home environment, certainly in a virtual environment. Concerned about space also, capacity to subdivide spaces. We'd like to see outdoor learning. Yeah, so I would just add to that we have purchased a tent. They're shipping within a week, so we'll have them well in time for the school year, because we know in some days outdoor learning could happen anywhere, and some days you really want 30 by 30 tent cover, which would fit all students. That's about the size of the average, a little larger than some of our elementary classrooms. I would say the subdivided spaces at Wildwood, they're already in work. So I know some people have peeked in the windows. I don't want to encourage people to be on the site, but having been in one of those spaces, it's gigantic. They're 1,900 square feet. It about triples the size, about 2 3/4 times the size of the usable space in our quads. I think that people will be wanting to be in them if they're in buildings next year because of their spaciousness, and they have true cross ventilation. I'm not trying to convince anyone, but having been in one, that would be my perspective. So the question is more or less, if you calculate the space for teachers, all of the spaces have been calculated for teachers. The state recommended 6 feet across, and we've calculated it at least 7, if not 8 feet across for the space for teachers. So beyond where they were. Elementary teachers have enough planning time to meet both in-person and digital learning simultaneously. We're looking, more at models where elementary teachers are either doing in-person or digital, not both simultaneously.
Dr. Mark, I'd add to that, one of the themes expressed in past school committee meetings is that, we have an amazing staff and teachers. This is our greatest resource. But they're only human, and they only have so many hours in the day. And so with funding being what it is, we don't want to set teachers or students up to fail. And so while it was nice that the state asked us to produce 3 different models, and how would we would accommodate and staff every single possible way to implement that across the spectrum of remote or in person. It's a bit of a cognitive dissonance ask, I think, to ask one teacher to prepare to do both simultaneously and to be able to pivot all the time between the 2 models. So that's, we haven't voted yet, it's still in process, but the school committee has expressed similar sentiment to what you just described, that we want to set our teachers and our students up for success. And, and if we can do that by allowing them to make in-person learning as effective as it can be, and making other teachers making remote learning as effective as it can be, greatly improved from the spring, then that's how we'd like to do it.
Yep.
Mike, I would just say I was looking at the guiding principles that the team for the elementary schools put together. And one of the things I noted was they talked about all working together across the breadth of the school, of the grade. And that perhaps there would be people who could do one thing versus another, and they would be thinking more broadly in terms of all the schools rather than just each individual school.
Thank you. So I do believe the school day likely would be shorter than normal. I think we spoke about that. I know I'm up to comments that were given at 12:18, so I'm trying my best to sort through ones that have been answered. Here's one about siblings. We would try to do our best with coordinating siblings. Our hope is that students at the elementary level would go to school every day, or my hope, I should say, is that students would go to school every day, but we've heard that concern, and we'd have to work that out from a transportation perspective. In terms of maintaining 6-foot distancing, the advice we've gotten from our state and public health as well as CDC is that students would stay in their cohorts, and specials and other things would come into the classroom instead of students going to other spaces. And that's really why we want to have a movement break. Again, a best case scenario outside, which can occur for most days on a very routine basis, because we know movement is critical for all students, but particularly for elementary students. We talked sort of about synchronous before, in terms of before and after school options. This one really hits at trying to keep cohorts together in our school all day. So we are actively engaging with our after school and before school providers, but this is where the health guidance and support for families are really bouncing up or, banging into one another. I think in our buildings, it's hard for us to imagine for the cleaning and disinfecting that our custodial and maintenance crew have to do, that we'll have students in buildings for the length of time that we have now. Right now, we have our earliest students get there between 7 and 7:30 for before school care and stay till 5:30. I can say that we would not have students at school for that length of time next year with all the health concerns and all the cleaning that we need to have. Another good question, cafeteria, movement room, art room. So all the spaces that were selected for instructional rooms at all schools had windows and univents and blowers for all the reasons that were mentioned before. And I think, again, de-densifying is what folks more knowledgeable than me tell me is just incredibly critical. And so having been in all these spaces, there's a lot of room in those spaces, and they all have windows as well as So here's a good one. The state, I was just on this conference call. I think in the next week, they're going to put out guidance around if a staff member or students test positive in quarantine. This is one of the reasons the school committee, and maybe one of you could comment about the 6 feet versus 3 feet. I don't know if Peter's nodding his head, and Allison, I don't know if you want to comment a bit on that particular aspect.
Sure, and I may also ask for help from Ms. Consolino as well. But one of the things that we've talked about in at the school committee meetings is the rationale between 6 feet and sort of the guidance from DESE, which says 6 feet as close as possible, minimum 3 feet, and sort of the understanding that that it can be challenging, particularly with younger kids, to have 100% compliance to guidance such as staying 6 feet away from each other, and that if we aim for 6 feet of distance, that gives us that wiggle room for when students are aiming to be closer together, that we're still presenting a safe space for that still meets sort of those minimum requirements. The other thought, and this is, I'm going to maybe ask Ms. Consolino to comment about the quarantining and sort of when one student becomes infected and who will need to be quarantined until we have that testing data, because I think that was also a really helpful data point for us to have in the school committee.
Sure. So to follow up on that, what's been happening with this virus and how to identify people that need to go under quarantine after somebody becomes symptomatic or test positive is the close contact definition is anybody who's been within a 6 foot distance of a positive or symptomatic person for a duration of longer than 10 to 15 minutes, and that can be spaced out throughout the entire day. So if we are able to get the kids to stay spaced apart for at least 6 feet, and even if they're within 6 feet for only a minute or two, that doesn't qualify them as being a close contact if somebody does end up testing positive. So I was on a conference call with DPH last week, and Dr. Katie Brown came on. She's one of the members of the advisory panel for the state, and she reiterated the fact with the 6 foot rule is it will eliminate a lot of this identification of people that need to go under a quarantine for 14 days if we can maintain that 6 foot as much as possible. And it'll make the contact tracing go a lot smoother, and it'll be a lot less people that are involved with that whole process. So there's guidance. I've asked for guidance from the state. Everybody has there's a whole group of nurse leaders that are looking for it, and they said it's to come. So we're waiting for it from them.
Yep. And so, I left that other question up. I apologize. So I'm just recognizing the time, and I tried to find some themes of questions. So there's some comments and questions about washing hands, and Jill is working right now on protocols, but certainly all the protocols that are being recommended have students washing hands upon entry, upon exit, and multiple times throughout the day. Classrooms that don't have sinks would have sanitizer stations already, or sanitizer, I don't know what they're called, Jill, but sanitizer station installed in them for ready use. Right now, and I know people are anxious, and I am too, right, what happens, but right now, Massachusetts numbers are very low. Other states in our country are incredibly high, and it's hard to know what'll happen. I think people may not have caught the beginning, but I want to share that other people on this call shared that if the numbers get to the point where we need to close school in person, we need to close school in person. At this point, our numbers, fortunately, both locally in terms of Hampshire and Franklin County, as well as across the state, we're one of 4 states that experts are saying has it. We're in reasonably good shape right now. That could change. We've seen that change in other states, and that's why we're developing multiple plans that we have to make a plan moving forward. And in the guiding principles document, the priorities document the school committee had, that may shift all remote if the situation changes. I've seen a number of comments about that. There's a lot on bathrooms. All the public health guidance is that bathrooms are cleaned routinely through the day. They're not after each use. That's true for places like grocery stores, other businesses that are open. There's increasing levels, and Jill, you can speak to this if you like, but of confidence that we want to clean them routinely, and I think that's important, but there's no guidance I've seen or received that it's after every single use based on the risk factors that have been established. And so that's sort of where we are with bathrooms. I'm just recognizing again it's 12:55, so I'm scrolling a bit to look for common themes. There's a number of, Jill, do you want to talk a little bit about duration versus distance? Because there's a number of questions around that, and I think we sort of addressed it, but I wonder if you could speak to that. Like if students get up to wash their hands, they may be closer than 6 feet to other students on their way, and just some thoughts you have on that.
Sure. So that comes down to the risk of exposure for either a student to student or student to staff member. And it has to be a prolonged exposure. And so the state keeps pushing this 10 to 15 minute time frame. And there's varying sources out there that have, this time of 10 to 15 minutes within 3 to 6 feet. And so just a brief interaction of, one student getting up from their desk and going over to the sink to wash their hands is not a potential to expose, all the 4 or 5 students that they may walk in front of. If this student happens to, is not wearing a facial covering and they happen to cough or sneeze on, that row of classmates, then yeah, there's the potential for exposure. But there has to be, you have to be face to face with somebody for, within this certain distance for a prolonged period of time to have an actual risk of exposure to this virus. And it escalates when there's coughing, sneezing, escalating of, increasing voice volume, shouting, that kind of stuff. That all increases the chance of risk for exposure to the virus.
Yep. Thank you. So I saw a couple comments I want to address. One is about there's potentially new CDC guidance coming out. And I'm just going to speak for myself. It's been a wacky week for this topic nationally. And what I would say is 2 things. One is that I'm committed. I'm not going to speak for anyone but myself. I'm committed to following the CDC guidelines that were released before. If there's political pressure, new CDC guidelines come out. I'm not swayed right now that I would recommend any changes from the guidelines that were expressed. I think it's, frankly, it's compromised some of people's confidence in organizations when CDC has guidelines, and perhaps it at least appears there's political pressure being placed. So again, I'm not asking anyone else to make that comment. I just wanted to make it myself, that, when in our planning, we're going with the original guidelines that we received. There's a question about cost of all different models. It's hard to figure out. We know that we have students that who have needs who will not be addressed in a virtual education model. So that's a hard one to itemize or to put into place. But I think that's one end of it, and the other end of it is hard to predict. So what we're doing right now is trying to keep tracking and accounting, knowing that we plan to have some in-person education next year, and we might be in a virtual environment, and that makes it very, very difficult to budget. But we're doing our best with that. There was a question about special ed and how would kind of one-on-ones or paraeducators work. And I think something that I'm looking forward to reading the guidance that again came in at noon today from the state. But in our current thinking is some students may have more in-person or in-class supports than they typically would. And some students may have, who are included less, may have different supports that may be more out of the classroom and specialized programs based on individual student need. Because, the IEPs that were written weren't written for a COVID era. And so we are engaging staff members on a case-by-case basis and trying to think through our students have that. There's a couple questions about staff members being in buildings. We have not willy-nilly opened up, but if staff members want to be in buildings, they certainly can be in touch with me. And we have loosened those opportunities. We do have, I know there are districts, including Holyoke, so pretty close to now, that did open summer school programming. We're looking at opening that a little bit later in the summer as the guidance has come on for that. So does it hold true you're in the same room as all children all day, 6 feet, no masks? So I think no one's suspecting that there's no masks even at the primary grades. We're talking about strongly encouraged, and come to that. We may have seen that. I may have seen that after it got answered. We are trying to limit the number of people who are going cross buildings, things like that, and the number of exposure that folks would have. For instance, elementary specialist teachers, typically at Wildwood, for instance, see would typically see 21 classes a week. They see every class every week. We'd be moving to a model where they stay with the same set of classes for weeks on end, again, because we are concerned about staff safety as well as student safety on that. The recommendations right now from the state is not that students are temperature checked on the way to the building. I know some states have recommended that, but the short story, and Jill, you can jump in if you like, is that those tests are about 75% effective, and that's not all that helpful in terms of high temperature, like just the temperature reading itself. And you think about different weather patterns, and Jill and I spoke about, you take a temperature of a student who is waiting at a bus stop in 20-degree weather, it may not be an accurate reading of that. Again, it's 1 o'clock now, so we can go on a little bit more, but I do want to be cautious about time, and this is not the only way to get in touch with us. The length of the day won't change if there's more breaks throughout the day. We'd again try to look to a later start and similar end time. And thank you. I saw some nice comments. I appreciate those, and I'm sure everyone else does on the call. And it's hard to scroll as much as I would like to. 6 feet is measured from the center of a desk. What is the effective distance between it? It depends on the length of the desk. And we have different size desks in our elementary school. So for that question, I can't answer it. It depends on that. Yeah, the PPE ordered and secured. Jill, we can certainly, if you send that, this question about the PPE ordered and that list, if you could send that to Sasha Figueroa, she can put it on the Return to School website. When will it be decided what plan we will move forward with? I'm going to turn to the school committee on that one. And I'll leave it with you all.
I'll answer sort of from my perspective. What we are going to, after this week's town halls, where on Tuesday, the 3 committees will be convening again to review what we heard, the questions, and continue discussing, and hopefully, my perspective, hopefully vote on the priorities that we've outlined and been discussing. We will be meeting again on the 21st, the following Tuesday, and hearing from the district more details about and specificity around the models. We haven't defined yet whether we will be voting at that meeting or whether it will be a discussion with a subsequent vote at a later meeting. I anticipate that it will be pretty concrete by that point, so that all of our teachers and staff and administration can really begin the hard work to get ready for school at the end of the summer. I don't know if the other chairs or vice chairs would like to add their perspective to that.
Yeah, so I mean, the only thing I would add, obviously all of those dates are consistent and everything, but just that we recognize how challenging this is, that people are really anxious about the time frame, teachers with time to prepare and families just trying to figure out what their life is going to look like in September. So kind of the short answer is really as soon as possible, but given constraints in terms of time for planning and putting together these different models, it will still take a few more weeks.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I was just going to echo those previous comments and say, that there's a real urgency. I think it's been expressed at school committee to identify this, not just for parent and student communication and anxiety, but staff need to be able to understand what the model is, implement the details, train, and then be able to implement it effectively. And like there's less than 8 weeks to do that at this point, and so there's that urgency there. That being said, even though this is for a change of this magnitude, this is happening really fast. It's still a really active decision process. I mean, I can just speak for myself that my mind isn't completely made up, and every day I see long, thoughtful, sincere messages of feedback from parents and teachers that change and evolve my thinking on this. So, we're detailed to this level because we have to be because of the schedule. But it's still really dynamic. And so I would really encourage everybody to continue to send your input to school committee at arps.org and morrism@arps.org and continue to be engaged like all the people I've been today.
Yeah, I saw a couple more. It's 1:04, so I think we are going to close up pretty quick. So the 4 I want to address, one is staff training. So absolutely, and I think for in-person schooling, I am working on different schedules and different models depending what the school committee decides of how to move forward, where we would want to have extra days of training, at least one I can guarantee, if not more, at the beginning of the school year for that. And again, starting the school year with gradual entry for students and staff, so that some of the trainings for staff and some of that's trainings for students and staff. There was a comment about, could teachers never be closer than 6 feet to students? And I think Jill sort of answered that before. The idea is that teachers wouldn't be stationed, that close, but it's not that there has to be a 6-foot bubble at every moment of every day. We know that we couldn't do school that way. So I think Jill addressed that earlier, but I just saw that and I want to address it. Really important one on paraeducators, absolutely. And one of the differences, if you watched last night's meeting, or if you didn't, just one of the things that one of the DESE models had in it was, I'm trying to think how to, maybe I'll actually show the slide. I think that's going to be better. So I'm sorry to take the time, and I know we're running late, but I think I can do this much better if I show it, if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. And let's eliminate us so it's larger. And so one of the things that you'll notice on here is the left is what DESE, to get all the seats in, is a copy and paste. And, first of all, you can see it's only 6 feet. Here we're talking generally about 8 feet gap between a teacher area. Also in the DESE slide, you have desks right up against that on the side. It really carves out one area. Whereas in the model that we'd be proposing, there are spaces for multiple adults, either for co-teachers, paraeducators. We didn't want to set up a dynamic that didn't allow for multiple adults, including talented paraeducators, translators, et cetera, to be in rooms. And it's one of the reasons I recommend, and the school committee has fully endorsed, not going to a 3 feet model that would be this tight, because it's not just about the one teacher. And I think that's a really important point. And I just wanted to sort of honor that, and it didn't feel good not saying that. Another one is cleaning and disinfecting. I know I talked about this a little earlier, but that's really why we're looking at reducing the length of the school day. So we are going to need to have more custodial staff working during the day for bathrooms, all those other areas. And we're going to need more time in the morning to be able to do that, to do both the cleaning and disinfecting. Wellness checks, what's being recommended for us by the state on wellness checks is really talking and almost have like a contract with families and staff around that. And the nurses will be certainly attuned to that, but not doing the temperature checks on there. And, there was one other one, a good point by Betsy. For our staff who work, the nature of their work is to be closer than 6 feet. Some of the PPE that Jill has ordered is for specific staff who do that. That includes isolation gowns, higher quality masks that would be like hospital grade or medical grade masks, goggles, things like that, because we know that there are teachers, paraeducators, absolutely everyone that Betsy Todd mentioned that do need to be within 6 feet, and they do need different PPE. Kind of it's the similar type of PPE that you would see at a doctor's office, and we need to protect our staff and our students, and that's why we purchased those pieces of equipment. 108, I think that's probably what we can get through on this call. Again, schoolcommittee@arps.org or morrism@arps.org. Please continue to send emails, contact us, public comment. All that's on our school committee agendas. I don't know if there's anything. There's one I have to answer about preschool and EEC. So sorry, Lindsay asked a really good one. That keeps happening. This is the last one. Lindsay wins. No more after this one. But so there is this discussion about EEC versus DESE guidance. And what I heard today is that public preschools that are connected to pre-K to 12 public school districts will follow the DESE guidance. And so we actually have a meeting. We had a meeting. I wasn't in it because I was on a DESE conference call. There was a meeting today with some of our folks trying to work through where's the differences, what's the same, because we do want to think about preschool. It is unique for all sorts of reasons, but the age of students in Amherst, it's a fully integrated program with roughly half the students having disabilities, and they're young kids. They're not going to sit at desks, right? It's really a different environment. And so we are working on that, and we'll have more on that soon. It's not that we have not included it in school committee dialogue because it's not important. It's just that the guidance continues to come out later for preschools. So great question. I apologize. It's not for lack of attention that we haven't been talking about. I haven't been talking about as much. It's actually just the information. I got that information literally yesterday and was confirmed this morning around which guidelines to follow. So that's where we'll end it. I'll just leave anyone on this call if they want to offer some final thoughts as well.
I think I've seen several questions about will we make these questions, the written questions available in any responses. And I just thinking out loud here is capturing all of these and then weaving in responses into our discussion in our meeting on Tuesday, rather than sort of publishing a question, an individual question and answer. Is we can take all of these questions and sort of weave them into our discussions so that hopefully by the end of that meeting, most of these questions will be answered as much as we can.
I also want to note, if no one else wants to jump in, that this live stream is accessible at the same link you're at. So if someone didn't see this and they want to view it, if they go to the same link you're on, it'll be up indefinitely. So people can watch this if they weren't able to make the noon time. If you want to share the link to others, if you feel like there was critical information shared or not shared, whatever you like, this is automatically records. And, we appreciate the 236 of you that are still on this live stream and hung on for 71 minutes. We appreciate that. And we hope we'll keep at it, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.